Hello, everybody. So, hopefully, barring any technical difficulties today, we've actually tested this for once. So, hopefully, I
Super
mean,
prepared.
super prepared. Yet it's me, so it will still undoubtedly go wrong at some point. But we are going to talk about the Austin Grand Prix today. Now, normally we would do this with three of us. But Wibsy has decided instead he's going to go off and test some simulators and stuff to try and improve his equipment for his his racing on our league. We wish him all the best, and hopefully
We
it
don't.
doesn't work for him, so that I can
Yeah.
still win. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk
No.
about the Austin Grand Prix. Now, how did you feel about the weekend, Bowser?
Right. I don't know. There's lots of talking points. Like quick summary. Another Max win. Sort of in the main race, and another sprint win for him as well. But a quick sort of review of it being much closer in the race at least. Which does bode well, especially for those Merc upgrades and Lando as well. Looking fantastic in the McLaren, which he has pretty much since the summer break, which is awesome. Shame about Piastri. Didn't really look on the pace sort of for the whole weekend, to be honest. But nothing against him because I think he's been brilliant. Like I said, since he's had those upgrades as well. So yeah, just general quick summary. Qualifying. Interesting to see a chink in Max's armor initially, but again, the
Absolutely,
sprint Saturday, I'd definitely say was just a kind of rinse and repeat for the rest of sprint weekends for Max, really. But yeah, we'll obviously dive into some more of those talking points in a second.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, definitely continuing McLaren's return to form ever since Hungary has been incredible. But we'll talk about more about that in a second. Got some general talking points in the F1 in general before we get stuck into the race weekend. One of the things I want to bring up mostly is what do you think about the changing of the thickness of lines during the race weekend? This is something that's starting to get on my nerves a little bit. Like, at the end of the day, that is the track limits. Why are we going, oh, a few drivers aren't getting on with these track limits. Let's just give them an advantage when everyone else has been playing by the rules by extending the track limits. And in particular this weekend, I thought it was quite funny that, after Max Verstappen has his pole taken away from him because of track limits, suddenly they changed the track limits. Seemed a bit fishy in my point of view, but what do you think on that?
Yeah, I don't like it, if I'm completely honest. I think obviously throughout a weekend, and especially sort of this whole new sprint series that they're doing, you're gonna find bits and pieces throughout the weekend that are gonna you're gonna find along the way that could have been improved. But I think you've really got to show consistency. I mean, when you arrive at an event, obviously, the last thing you'd think they'd be changing is the track. Like, it's tarmac at the end of the day. So, and for me, it's got to stay consistent throughout the weekend. If one person's struggling with it, everybody else is either struggling with it as well or dealing with it. So everybody else, if you're struggling with it, you need to adapt at the end of the day. I mean, obviously, the gap between that race and next year's race, of course you can learn from this mistakes or things you've learned in this weekend and bring that to next year. Of course you can, absolutely. But I think thickening white lines, literally just painting a thicker white line, for me was an absolute joke. It just seems like a cheap fix to try and sort of improve some of the racing at times. But it's I know that possibly part of it's through trying to avoid the whole track limits being quite so apparent throughout the race and of potentially affecting the race result too much.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. But at the same time, they
that's what
are
it's there
there
for.
for a reason. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely,
If
100%.
if it was Monaco or Baku or something like that, they'd be in a wall.
It's the wall.
Like,
Yeah. Oh,
why
Barry.
should
Yeah,
it be any
absolutely.
different? And I don't feel like
Absolutely.
it's fair on the drivers that are staying and are able to stay within those track limits that
Hmm.
they are being punished in that way, really, because. If they've got a driving start that allows them to get advantage, if that's someone at the back of the grid, like a Haas or a Williams, and they can stay within track limits and get good speed, but Max Verstappen or one of the McLarens or someone like struggling,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
brings it all closer together. So why are we
Sure.
trying to prevent that by extending these these lines. It just seems ridiculous, and I think the FIA need to stop pandering to specific drivers. I think personally.
Well, I think to be fair, even if it's not necessarily like, even if Max was the one that's dealing great with it and the others were all struggling, like that's that's a bonus for him of doing better and adapting to it. It's again, they keep coming out with the whole throughout the process of, oh well, Red Bull are dominating, we're not going to punish success, that's wrong, that sends a bad precedent. Well, at the same time, you should also have a consistent racetrack for our weekend. And here in sort of the Sky Sports, Anthony Davidson on SkyPad, people like that, other TV platforms are available, hearing him talk between the days, he was literally referring to the Saturday or Multipoint Friday to Saturday when I was watching them and watching the the info there. He was talking about two different types of tracks, one with the thicker lines, one without, and that to me that just feels wrong. That it's like on a football match, it's like changing the goalposts. Someone might have really dialed in on that Friday better than anybody else to that tighter line. Really dialed into that and had a great advantage, and they've just sort of let everybody else just catch up with a thicker line. So I really, really didn't like that. I think that's, like you say, it shows sort of inconsistency throughout the weekend, and just cheap fixes to try and solve a problem which isn't even really there.
No, just hire more stewards. I mean, I even don't think do they pay them? I think they might be volunteers. Get more volunteers to do the track limits, or if it's to do a qualifying in particular, just have a bit more of a gap in between sessions so you can check everything. Like, I think I saw over the weekend as well, they talked about George Russell getting that penalty, and the fact that maybe it should have been applied during qualifying. I mean, if they're going to start doing things like that, then have a bit more of a gap in between so you can have that discussion. I mean, I don't understand the reason behind it otherwise. Like, it just blows me away. Sense.
You see some tracks, like, great example is Imola. Even where it does have runoff areas, the section, you don't even need a massive gravel trap. They've made little gravel traps, probably, let's say, sort of 2-3 meters wide, on the exit of the kind of like green AstroTurf on the outside of the curb, which is basically the distance of the car from as it just about goes over the white line. So if it's on the green Astro, it normally means it's got, at least 1 or 2 tires still on the track, so it's fine. And anything beyond that is 2-3 meters of gravel. I know some people don't like gravel getting kicked up onto the road, I understand that, but or like more to point, the cars skipping over the gravel and the harsher penalty that brings. But then you can still have runoff the other side. Well, yeah, that's one thing, but also you can still have plenty of runoff areas the other side of that little gravel strip. So to try and so the cars get slowed down consistently more, and obviously encourages them really not to use that as or get too close to that edge, and just give a little bit more of a margin, or go closer if you want to risk it, but obviously you pay the penalty if you get it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's it. At the end of the day, we need to just stick to the rules and stop changing them from race to race, and that's from session to session. Effectively, that's what's happened in this situation. The other thing as well is them not enforcing track limits in practice. Why are we not doing that? This is something I didn't find out about until this weekend when I was watching the F1 TV coverage. They were talking about, they don't actually enforce track limits during practice. Why? You're allowing the drivers to get into the bad habit at that point. Enforce it the whole way through the weekend.
I do see where you're coming from, but at the same time, for someone going consistently off trying to find the limit in practice, and then potentially them getting penalised for qualifying in the race because they went off too many times in practice, seems a bit ridiculous.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying penalise them for it, but delete the lap time. That's all they have to do.
Oh, gotcha, yeah. Oh, yeah,
for track
100%.
limits. One of the things I remember from last year, Mick Schumacher saying, he was able to go through practice. He was able to go through practice 1, 2, and 3, taking a line, and he got to qualifying, and he didn't make it through in qualifying because his lap time kept getting deleted for something that he thought was fine because he'd done it all the way through practice. At the end of the day, we're not setting the drivers up to successful in that regard if we're not doing it consistently for every single session.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that one for sure. Obviously, if you're having that in practice sessions, delete the time. Obviously, that's enough of a penalty in itself, but at the same time, you can still get the data from the lap, the teams, anyway. So, yeah, I totally agree. And also, I think an element of that should have been his team should have been a bit hotter in the sense of That was a really good lap, but actually, if this was in qualifying situation, that wouldn't have counted. So please give a bit more margin in turn 16 or whatever it is.
Sure, but then equally, are the teams at that point, because they're not hearing anything, thinking, oh, okay, this is okay then? There needs to be the FIA needs to keep the rules consistent throughout the weekend, in my opinion.
I agree, 100%. Like you say, just time to lead is fine. People can still make mistakes without the ultimate penalty of anything affecting their race or qualifying. So I think we're pretty much in agreement there, and I think a lot of people will be as well with us. So
that leads us on nicely though to the minimum time delta in qualifying for going around. What is the point in this? Like I've heard it brought up, I don't know how many times, this many drivers are under investigation for not meeting the minimum time delta, and no one's ever penalised for it.
And nothing
happens. What's the point in having this rule? Like, if they're not going to enforce it, yes, okay, sometimes be mitigating circumstances, but 7 drivers having the same amount of mitigating circumstances, there's got to be a point where the FIA have to go, right, we're just going to get rid of this rule, or we're going to start enforcing it so that people aren't dawdling round. And
absolutely.
There's got to be a point where they start to do it. Otherwise, we've just got a pointless rule, and that's why.
Well, again, from watching various sort of points throughout the weekend being discussed on this, I understand why the initial concept of the idea came in. The danger of closing speed. If you think of someone trundling down, I mean, you think how long that straight is in Austin, right?
Well, especially if you've got Monza and things like that, where they're all just lining up around the corner.
Monza as well. Yeah, so you've got straights that you're finishing off that straight just before the braking zone are potentially 210 215 miles an hour. If you've got someone sat at 40 miles an hour at the end of there sort of trying to find a gap or trying to get out of the way of someone, the closing speed there is horrendous, and the crashes and the danger that can cause within a track is just catastrophic.
I mean, look at Fernando Alonso and Stroll last year. That was a horrific crash, and that was only halfway down, I believe.
I mean, that was even in racing situations. So, but yeah, it's like you're saying, sort of, high speed crashes are dangerous enough as it is, let alone that amount of a difference in the closing speed. What I understand the idea of let's bring something in to try and, again, like I said, minimize the chance of that happening. I do understand that. However, again, as you said before, it's either enforce it or don't. Or more to the point, enforce it or don't have it at all. Even if they're a bit more clearer in the sense of, okay, well, in this section of the track, you can't find your gap. I think, there needs to be something in there that basically protects against those highest speed points against cars sort of dawdling, like you said. That's where they need to sort of protect it. But, I mean, having a minimum time delta and having, cars trying, you don't want to start your qualifying lap directly behind someone else. You've got people who are gonna, start fighting basically down into turn 1, which I think was Leclerc and Alonso in the last race. And basically both laps get ruined because but neither of them are going to want to yield. Essentially, whoever doesn't make it through that corner. I was trying not to bring up our league in this, but essentially, whoever doesn't come out that corner first, their lap's gone. It's done. The sort of the air wash off the dirty air, your lap's finished if you're that close behind. But on the other side,
this kind of brings us back to qualifying as a whole. If this is a problem that we're experiencing as a whole with this format, do we need to look at change the format? Do we need to look at one shot qualifying, one shot per each qualifying session? That, I think, would be a way to improve qualifying as well. Every driver had one lap in quali for Q1, Q2, and Q3. I think it would be a very different game.
Again, I do see where you're coming from, but the reason why they moved to this kind of this scenario of qualifying that they've got now is because, especially in changeable conditions, the car that has to go out first, whether that be the Max at the head of the World Championship or Logan, for example, at the other end, whoever's going out first might have a very different condition to who's at the end, which I know might cause mixed up grids, but when you're looking at qualifying to give everyone a fair opportunity to set a representative lap to give them a grid slot, I do understand why they potentially move towards this well, why they did end up moving towards this sort of format compared to that one-shot quality. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, they would have every car going out, ghosting through each other, as you find on the game, round at exactly the same time in exactly the same condition, and everyone hits the same condition, and you all kind of run from that point, and everyone's sort of lap, fastest wins, yeah, that kind of style. But
I completely understand what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I agree though. It's super dangerous having people dawdling, especially in the end of the last corner. Obviously, George got sort of penalised this weekend for blocking Leclerc, and again that closing
pretty
speed.
Slam dunk. I think Leclerc.
Oh, 100.
Leclerc's line though really made me laugh. It was penalty for Mr. Russell, please.
Yeah, I know.
I
I know.
to myself for that one.
I know. But then again, do you look at only handing out a penalty if it has hampered that driver enough that they haven't got through? I know we're obviously trying to say, but it's difficult enough, like trying to get your own gap, let alone watching cars come in 4 times quicker than you around the corner behind, and in that exact scenario as well, when George came round T19, he had 2 other slow cars that did get out of the way before Leclerc came round T19. So George going through T19, looked backwards, he only had 2 slow cars behind him. So obviously, I'm assuming that he probably got told that Leclerc was, or at least some cars were coming through quicker, but it's difficult enough.
Was
and
he waiting too long to start his lap? Like I can't remember back to if there was many people in front of him on track. Maybe there was, but is it right for him just to sit there waiting if he could have gone? Like, is there a point where you could say, well, okay, you've got such a gap to the car in front, you're about to go into your hot lap, you just need to go at that point?
Yeah, that's the question. That's what they need to sort out. There needs to be some sort of more consistency, or at least maybe even looking at something that Formula E are doing, where they do qualifying in groups, like smaller groups. So they run like a pool A, B, C, D, break it up so there's like
a pulled from a hat kind of thing, or.
Well, yeah, I think, or at least maybe done in championship order. I'm not 100% sure, but
my concern is that if you're just doing it in like championship order, it kind of goes back to the one-shot qualifying from before, isn't it? It's a similar kind of thing to that.
Yeah, but then so it's you get at least like those 5 cars are pitted against. So they're pitted against sort of the other 5 in that session, and the top 2 go through to like a top 10 shootout, and that way it's and then obviously you do the other like sort of pools. So you've got B, C, and D, and they only really need to worry about sort of trying to become that top 2, and then going into like the final, which it's just creating less cars on track at the time, so there's less chance of cars being in the way and it's being less dangerous. So, and also removes the issue of getting a consistent lap time in the same conditions, because obviously it sucks if you go out in one of these pools and your lap time is then pitted against the other pools of the drivers that got knocked out, and then there's times get set, and if that's in different conditions, I understand that might be a bit difficult. Maybe pool A have a really wet track to go on, and their times are obviously considerably slower than maybe pool D, where it's really starting to dry up. But I think at some point in this sort of scenario, you've just got to accept that sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose in that scenario. But then that would at least give the top 10 less cars on track at the time, less chance of the closing speeds and getting caught up in that sense, and then the quickest of the cars, you've done well enough to get into there, you deserve the right to then have less cars on track to hit that and fight for somewhere in the top 10. So I think maybe that might be worth looking at, and I think Formula E do something along those sort of lines, and that potentially could be something that that is looked at.
No, I think that could be an idea to eventually look at. Whether or not Formula 1 will be seen to be following Formula E's example, I don't know. But yeah,
if it works, it works, in my opinion.
They either need to start enforcing their own rules or come up with a new format.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically. Right, we can have a look at a few more of these general talking points later on, but let's get stuck into the actual race, shall we? Because we've got to go through quali, sprint, and then a race. So there's a fair amount to cover in this time slot. And let's face it, we don't want to still be here at 1 a.m. So,
which with us talking, that could well be. Well, exactly, we could easily get there. Easily get there.
Very, very much true. So, okay, do you want to start with talking us through quali Q1?
Yeah. So obviously, quali happened on a Friday evening. which is always a bit different in the sprint quali. So first point to come up was Alonso not getting even out of Q1. He's been in Q3 the entire season. How much of this is Alonso, running out of steam, running out of confidence in what Aston Martin are doing with this car, and how much of it is these sort of upgrades being massive downgrades at the end. So, and from what we've seen them running in the race, a different spec car, and him doing, and obviously until he retired, generally better. Did he retire?
Yeah, he did retire at the end. I think he had a problem with his floor or something like that towards the end.
At least had issues which caused affected his race result.
You bring up the spec of the car. Now it could be that we're having a thing here where like the new spec suits Lance Stroll more than Fernando Alonso. Like obviously qualifying aside, the race result and everything as a whole, Stroll seems to have gotten back on form this weekend. Now,
definitely
is
this
designed to suit his race style, and therefore that's why Fernando's not got on with it. Are we looking at a similar kind of thing to what happened with Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren? Like, is this a completely different design that's just not to his liking, and that's why Fernando's gone, I'm going back to the old one, thank you very much?
I think, to be fair, with them both starting in the pit lane, I think they took the opportunity, or at least being both towards the back end of the grid, they could take that option of changing the car in Parc Fermé and starting from the pit lane. Not throwing away the race, but essentially using it as an extended practice session, which to have a real look at these upgrades in a direct comparison. I'm not sure how much I agree with being able to run two different specs of cars in the same race. I think teams should turn up with one spec and both sort of run it. But obviously, if that rule is not in place, I understand totally why they did it. I would say that looking through the race, obviously until Stroll retired with his... he had braking issues throughout the weekend, but whatever caused him to retire when he did fairly early on, up until that point...
Yeah, the sprint.
Stroll
finished the race, but not the sprint
race. Yeah. Oh, okay. So... But either way, looking throughout the actual race today, on the Sunday, where they ran the two specs of cars, Alonso's always, he's just an amazing driver. So basically, you don't expect Lance to be beating him, but the difference in them for the rest of the season to Sunday's race in the new spec, I would tend to agree with you. I reckon the new spec, certainly Stroll until various issues creep in. Yeah, that new spec seems to be suiting him, and the old spec seems to be suiting Alonso, but obviously upgrades, you're going to need them, and if they're not going to upgrade Alonso spec any further, and you can't really... I mean, like I said, I don't agree with them turning up with two specs for the rest of the season of car to run, Stroll spec and Alonso spec. So, how do you run that? I don't know. But and whether Daddy Stroll's deciding to give Lance the car that he's always wanted, again, I think they're competitors at the end of the day. They're going to give they want their best driver to be doing as best they can. So I don't think that's really going to be a thing. But yeah, it doesn't look great for them, especially how well they started at the sharp end of the season, at the start of the season to where they are now. It's sad to see, to be honest. But there was always going to be
also really
teams...
good to see, in a sense. Like I kind of see it both ways. Like it's sad to see them drop off, but it's good to see that for once we have a season where the development race is so much so that a team that can go from finishing second most races to dropping right down to the back and even off the edge of the points. I mean, it's quite impressive.
Yeah, it shows what the other teams are being able to do, which is great. And especially, I mean, Mercedes with their resources, we're always going to come back strong at some point. I'm a bit, as a strong Mercedes fan myself, I'm ashamed it's happened so late in the season, but I mean, I'm sure the Mercedes team themselves share that anguish of not happening sooner. Ferrari, again, seemed to be consistent, but consistently not quite there. Not as bad. They were ahead of Mercedes, and now they're kind of sat behind, but they've kind of stayed the same to Red Bull. So when Red Bull have improved, they've improved, but no better, no worse. So, and Aston have obviously dropped out of that sort of race. Mercedes have come in. McLaren being the biggest jumpers from the back of the grid at the start,
Absolutely,
basically doing the opposite to Aston, and now arguably being the second best team on the grid.
Yeah, sacrificing the first 8 races in which to do that, but it seems to have paid off for them. They look like they're going to potentially end up in 3rd place in the championship. So
Yeah, I mean, you've seen Ferrari do it in the past. They bring a B-spec car. I mean, bringing a B-spec car from one event to the next, completely fine. Absolutely. If things aren't working, the direction you went in didn't work, fine. Absolutely. My concern, especially with what Aston are doing, is having 2 spec cars at the same event. I'm not sure how that
I'm
sits
not
with
sure
me personally.
I'm upset about that. I mean, it's not the first time we've seen it. Let's not forget the year when we had Haas, who were really struggling, and they had Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen run different cars. I think that in order to be bringing 2 different specs to a race weekend, it's a lot of work on the team to do that, and you're not going to do that unless you're struggling. I think it'd be different if you're in Red Bull's situation and they were bringing a car that suits Max and a car that suits Perez, and then they're finishing 1-2. I think in that situation, then you've got to look at it and go, hang on, this isn't fair. But if it's to do with a team who's struggling and they're desperately trying to find a way to catch up, I'm not so sure I feel against that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Anyway, let's run.
Speaking of Haas,
Yes.
what a shocker! I mean, this upgrade was much lauded. Like I've heard it referred to as the white Red Bull and all this, that, and the next thing in the lead up to this Grand Prix, and then it was nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
You know what shocks me in that? It was in actual Friday qualifying. One of the sessions, probably about halfway through that first qualifying session, Hulkenberg went and stuck it on pole. And at that point, hearing about all those upgrades, I was like, oh my god, I didn't expect it to really be a thing. I thought it'd just be a bit of a all swinging no ding, if you will. Yeah, absolutely. But I was just like, yeah, it's never going to happen. And then he just slaps it on provisional pole, or at least quickest in the session. And I did. I sat back in my chair and I was just like, oh my god, maybe this is true. Maybe Haas are going to suddenly become amazing.
And then I literally go dun 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 dun.
Well, I don't know whether they threw him out at a point in between other people's stints, and there was such a massive sort of lap or track evolution with the rubber going down and the laps were getting considerably quicker from the start of the session to the end of that. So yeah, I don't know whether they timed it wrong, but yeah, I looked away for 10 seconds.
Out, isn't it, in Q1?
Yeah, he's such a good qualifier, Hulkenberg. He really is. I mean, he's proven that since his very early Williams days. And to see him first, I was kind of like, well, and almost by the point that I'd finished saying the word wow, he was already halfway back down the grid. And then, he even went
strong this weekend as
well. Yeah, and then he went, he was out at the end of Q1, and I was, at that point, all of my hopes for the Haas team and their upgrade just sort of disappeared. And I mean, starting the race on Sunday again with Aston in the pit lane just kind of proves it's, not exactly what they were hoping for. But a sprint weekend isn't the best time to bring upgrades. I've said this multiple times before. There's just not enough practice time to really get a grip of, it's a completely different car, essentially. It's going to react differently with the airflow going all the way down the car. So you need all 3 practice sessions, standard practice sessions, both cars on the track for the entire time, nobody bin it, nobody putting a wall, and just read the data of these new, and then that would help massively with the setup. And I think if they had a bit more time, they might try again at the next event in Mexico, but again, being at the,
I mean, that's
it is. But
that without having a free practice weekend, they probably are struggling this weekend. But they probably were like, it's a 3 weekends in a row. We need to get this out there. We can't wait another week.
Yeah, but it's you in that triple header. You've got this one and Brazil in 2 weeks' time that are both sprint weekends. And the one in between is Mexico, where, because of the altitude of the track, the airflow is so much thinner, so downforce is heavily affected. So, they're bringing upgrades to this triple header, which, don't get me wrong, again, obviously you want to be developing the car as much as you can throughout the season, but this is possibly one of the worst opportunities to do it, to have that ready, because you've got 3, essentially, very unusual weekends to try and get it working. So, if it was me, I would have either tried to rush something through a little bit earlier, or maybe just said, maybe bring or at least like put part of it on that's easily calculatable, that you
I
know
mean,
is going to potentially work, and then bring something in later.
I mean, to be fair, maybe this is what they've done. Maybe they originally were like, okay, we want to get this out for Austin, and then they've not managed to do it in time, so we've not seen the full package yet.
Maybe,
It could be something like that, but we'll have to wait and see. But even so, it's
We
still
will.
a shocker with all the hype coming into it.
Yeah.
Continuing with the Q1, which we still not managed to get through because we just like to talk so much. Logan Sargent, like I get it, he's struggling and he's struggling to fight for a seat. Didn't get out of Q1 again, and then to come on the radio and go, "That was awful." Yeah, it was. Why are you the one telling us that you're doing awful? Like, don't do that. That's not a good sign, mate. Just keep your mouth shut.
I mean, I'd imagine it was something more to do with either the track condition or the part of the way the car was responding to him. But I do see your point. Like, yeah,
It very
at
much
that
sounded
point,
like he thought it was awful because he'd gone off on this lap. So he was on his hot
Yeah.
lap, he'd gone off. And so it very much looked like on the radio he was saying that was awful from him. And I just think
Yeah.
when you're already struggling and your team's questioning whether or not to keep you, maybe don't tell them that you're awful.
I think it's plain to see for everyone. He is really struggling, and obviously he's had good point. Like, he's had little moments in the season where he started to look like he was really. The thing that comes back to mind for me personally is he was doing actually quite good at the Netherlands Grand Prix. At least the qualifying, starting to do really, really well. Was really starting to close in on Albon, and like you say, threw it in the wall. Yeah, for Logan, I feel for rookies. If you have a look back at the successful rookies, you know, when Lando came in, when George came through, they weren't always, you know, absolutely astoundingly quick, absolutely race to race, but they were consistent and they kept it out the wall and you know, delivered time and time again consistent results, and built their way up throughout the. And I think if you have a look through some of the rookies recently, like again Nick De Vries comes to mind, where you've just tried to make that impact straight away and suddenly be super quick in a series in a car that you're not familiar with and you do need to get up to speed with. You're more susceptible to big mistakes like that, and you know, people will start questioning if you've got the bottle for it. So
absolutely,
yeah.
I mean, look at load of the rookies that we've had come through in the last amount of years, and the only standout one that I'd say has been any different is Oscar Piastri, who has been absolutely brilliant. I think he's probably having one of the best rookie seasons I've seen since like Lewis. It's like
he's doing
a
I totally
fantastic
agree.
job there in that McLaren.
And he doesn't have the car that Lewis had. So
No, exactly.
when he came in, like being that close to the sharp end, especially
Still
for the
won a
first
sprint
half of the
race,
season. Yeah, no, exactly. No,
It's-
absolutely.
His first year is
100%.
still. I mean, do we classify that as a win or not? There's some debate over that.
I do.
But-
It's a set amount of racing laps that you need to try and engineer, so you're at the sharp end at the end, and he was, and beating 3-time world champion Max Verstappen. So
Absolutely. But then,
because he was actually crowned in that race, so
absolutely, yeah, that's a fair point. But then looking back at the other rookies we've had, I mean, we've had Nick De Vries, as you say, Logan Sargent, we've had blooming Mazepin, Schumacher, and Latifi. Like,
Yep.
none of them were anything special. And you got to start thinking to yourself, what is going wrong with the feeder series? I mean, even Yuki Tsunoda, who also has come through as a rookie in that time, he's been average at best. I mean, he's had a good race this time, but he's been average at best. He was convincingly beaten by Gasly during their time together. He's beat Nick De Vries, but is that impressive? Like, looking at what happened with De Vries? I think it's going to be interesting to see how he stacks up against Daniel for the rest of the season and next. Especially next, considering that Daniel's probably only got, 5 races left this year, is it, to actually make an impact?
3, I think. 3 or 4? 4.
Well, we've got, like, Las Vegas and all that sort of stuff. It must be, I think it's like 5, maybe it's 8. Maybe
yeah.
It's 8. But either way, like, he's not got a full season. It'll be interesting to see what happens towards the end of the season. If Daniel gets up to speed with this car, now he's come back from his accident and stuff, or if Yuki continues to beat him. If that continues into next year, does Yuki get the push? I don't know. But up until now, in my opinion, Yuki has been average at best. He had his very first race in Bahrain. I thought, wow, we've got something special here. And then he just never really delivered again.
Yeah, he's been one of those drivers that he's had really special moments, and really just being absolutely nowhere. So, yeah, very inconsistent, which won't favour his chances of making it to the Works Red Bull team. I think they'll be looking for someone that's a bit more constant, consistent, which I think is why, even though Daniel's been out for a year and a half, or it was about half a year or whatever, he's still arguably more in the sort of running and the chatter around taking over potentially if Perez loses that P2 in the championship. So Lewis, which he's lost even more points today for. Yeah, it seems to be they're talking far more about Daniel than they are Yuki taking that seat. And
all I can think is like, how good was the lap times he sat at that Silverstone set like practice?
Well, apparently they would have put him on the front row, which is exactly what Red Bull want. Bear in mind, I think Perez started that race 7th, 6th.
And let's not forget that before this weekend, wasn't it like 4 or 5 races in a row or something like that? Like he hadn't reached Q3.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's ridiculous. In the best car by a country mile.
Yeah, I know there's an element of it maybe not suiting him, but still, that's an excuse for I'm not quite where my teammate is. If the car suits my teammate better,
I actually would like to compare Gasly and Albon's seasons that they were dropped and where their qualifying was in comparison to Perez's, because I think he's probably not far off, if not worse.
I think if Max hadn't been so dominant this year, the fact that Max would be leading the constructors title on his own without any points from Perez, if that wasn't the case and that car was a little bit closer to the rest of the field, I think there'd be a heck of a lot more pressure on Perez.
That's the other thing. You've got to look, like, back in those years that I'm referring to, with the Gasly and Albon, Red Bull wasn't the most competitive car.
No.
So if we look and compare it, and, like, he's near their qualifying, that's appalling, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
in a far more dominant
I haven't
car.
actually checked it, so I can't confirm if not that is
No,
the case,
I can't. No.
That car should not be missing Q3 at all. Like, it should be there barring a mechanical failure, every week. That should be there.
I totally agree. Anyway, the next point that was there is Albon's result. Obviously, again, going out in Q1. I keep thinking throughout the watching week in, week out, all these races, especially compared to Logan, which I know we've already mentioned isn't exactly setting the world alight, so it's not the best benchmark. But I feel like so much of it is Albon outperforming that car that to see him go out on the odd Q1, bear in mind where that Williams probably is, if you forget where Albon's actually managing to get it, I wouldn't be that shocked, to be honest. If Albon's, I mean, he was really nearly there as well. I think it was within like 100th of a second or something that he missed out by.
I think he missed out by a very small margin.
Yeah.
I think he was only just behind Yuki Tsunoda by like 0.001 or something silly like that.
Yeah, it's something crazy like that, and that's what I mean. It like I said, I'm not gonna start barking at Albon for that, to be honest. In that car, it's more a case of I think we should be just celebrating how well he's done on the other weekends to get that even sometimes into Q3, which is a joke in that car, to be honest. Obviously, it's very slippy in a straight line. There are going to be tracks that suit that better, to like, especially for example Monza. But I think Albon's just been phenomenal, pretty much since he's rocked up at Williams.
I'm going to say Williams are showing what Red Bull could have had if they'd given Albon more time at AlphaTauri.
Yeah, I don't think for a second they gave Albon long enough. I think they were
through his first season. I mean,
yeah, and you know, if you actually think about the times where, unfortunately, as a Mercedes fan, when he got punted out by Lewis twice, if you actually like think about where he would have been in those examples, if that contact hadn't have happened, which I know an element of that is don't put yourself in as much danger. If you've got the speed, be a bit more patient, yada yada yada, whatever you want to say about that, is if Lewis and Albon hadn't come together, he would have arguably won both those races. And if he'd won both those races, do you think he would have lost his seat?
Absolutely not.
I think it's very sighted and small-minded of them to have got rid of Albon from that competitive car.
Was Red Bull having everyone talking to them about, oh, it's so bad for Perez not to have a seat. So bad for Perez not to have a seat. I think there's a lot of everyone talking about Perez and
I
lauded
don't
how
think that
good
should
he
have come
was.
into it personally.
But I do think that is, because I think the way that Perez was bigged up in that season, especially towards the end, like, yeah, he had some good results. I arguably think that the Racing Point car that year should have been a title fighter, and I think that actually the combination of Perez and Stroll was what brought that down. But that's probably controversial. But based on Perez's performance now in the Red Bull, I feel like I'm a bit justified that actually maybe in the right hands that car could have done better. But
One thing I
think
think's
the big
interesting
hype
on that
around
point.
him has helped him get that Red Bull seat from like all the fans backing him. Because I think, especially with the Mexican fan backing and all, like Perez has been there for so long, he's got huge backing, whereas Albon was quite new still, didn't have a fan support as much, and I think that potentially edged it in the end.
Yeah, one thing is, I'm going to put a hypothetical situation to you, and just I'd like to get your opinion. Do you think Red Bull would have signed Perez if George hadn't have had the issues at Sakir when he was deputising for Lewis, who was sick with COVID at the time? If George had gone on to win that race, obviously we know George's career went to Mercedes, so that didn't really end up hurting him too bad, but they saw the potential that he would have essentially won that race. Do you think, because George would have run that race rather than Perez, if he didn't have had the issues that he had and putting the wrong set of tyres on, if Perez hadn't have won that race, do you think Red Bull would have signed him?
No.
No.
Straight
I don't
I think
yeah.
it came down to Perez.
It was a brilliant drive.
winning that race.
It was a brilliant drive that day by Perez. It was a fantastic drive. But if like George hadn't have had the issues he had and would have won that race, and we wouldn't have been mentioning Perez, and really other than a great drive to P2, which it would have been.
Yeah.
And if Lewis didn't have COVID, do you think Lewis would have lost that race?
No.
Absolutely not. Like Lewis would have romped away with that in that form that he had at the time, and that Mercedes being that dominant at the time. I don't see Lewis losing that race. So again, Perez wouldn't have been talked about.
I think Red Bull have over the years made a series of bad decisions in regards to drivers ever since Daniel Ricciardo left. I think their biggest mistake was letting Daniel Ricciardo leave. They did not do enough to support Daniel to want to stay in that team. Like, yeah, they preferred Max. Did they have to be so obvious about it? I don't know.
No.
But I think that at the time, the combination of Max and Ricciardo was probably the strongest lineup on the grid. And Red Bull let that slip away, and then they've been scrambling to put it back together ever since and not been able to find the right piece. And I think that's what brings us back round to why we are now.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely look back at the timeline and say that Red Bull have had one driver performing week in, week out in Max since and the last time he had a really, really competitive teammate who really was taking wins away from him would be Daniel, for sure. So I do tend to agree with you, but like I said, I liked that they're trying to bring their young drivers through, at the same time. Daniel, I think, made that decision. He got frustrated with having so many DNFs towards that season I think part of it, maybe he was a bit silly to have jumped out of Red Bull. Bear in mind, Red Bull were the only team that seemed to have been able to, give Mercedes a headache at that particular time. I don't think he should have left himself, and I think he decided they'd had enough of being Max's number two. It's like you say, them being so obvious about it. So yeah, there's an element of that. But I did like the fact that they're trying to bring Gasly through. I did like the fact that when Albon got given his chance, it's just they didn't give it long enough. It didn't give those drivers enough time to actually get into the seat and feel more comfortable in the car and help with the development to bring that car to a car to a spec that's going to suit them, like they have with Max throughout the time he's been there. They've always made a car towards him.
Absolutely agree. And both Albon and Gasly have shown that they have quality there since they've left the Red Bull program. Like Gasly finished on the podium that same year. The quality was there, definitely, for sure. And what Red Bull are going to do in the future, I think, very much depends on how Hamilton finishes this season. I think it's a classic Red Bull versus Hamilton again, but this time it's for P2 and it's for Checo's seat. But
yeah.
Let's move on from that anyway, because we still haven't made it through Q1 and we've been talking for like 40 minutes now. So.
I know.
I think it was really nice to see Ricciardo back. This is the last point for Q1 that I have. But seeing Ricciardo back, he actually managed to get out of Q1 ahead of Yuki, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. On your return with he's had 2 full races, he's had 1 practice session, he's had a broken hand in between, and to beat your teammate out in qualifying, in your first qualifying back, is pretty good. It's pretty special in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want to sound pessimistic.
Nah, bring it on.
Slightly unpopular opinion. I'm a big fan of bringing through younger talent. I think, you need to constantly be looking for the future. Mercedes obviously did it with George specifically, and Red Bull looked like they were doing it when they promoted Gasly and Albon through, as we just mentioned. So, it's strange that they've gone for someone in Daniel's part of his career, and again picked up Perez at his point in his career, where I think, again, I feel like they're being a little bit short-sighted to leave someone who's done as well as they have in Liam Lawson on the bench, essentially. Where they've got Yuki, who, as we've discussed already, isn't really performing. And Daniel Ricciardo, I know they obviously want to use him as a yardstick, a consistent, member of that family for so long. They know what he can do. But I just feel really bad for Liam Lawson really in this scenario, and I would have liked to have seen him. I would have liked to see him.
I know he has been promised a seat at the end of next season, no matter what.
Apparently, that's not confirmed, actually.
Oh, okay. Last I saw it was a quote from Helmut Marko, so I assumed it was. But
yeah, but I don't think Helmut Marko is particularly in everyone's good books right now.
That is also true. I mean, I think the correct situation for Red Bull here is possibly actually what they've done. Like, you don't really know how good Yuki is right now. Like, he convincingly was beaten by Gasly, Pierre, is what I was thinking. He's convincingly beat by Gasly, who Red Bull decided wasn't good enough for their program. So, can you justify keeping him in there to promote him up without checking him again? Like, he convincingly beat Nick De Vries, but who's to say Logan Sargent wouldn't have convincingly beat Nick De Vries? We'll never know. He didn't perform to anywhere near the level of what we expected from someone who was a champion in Formula 2 and Formula E. So I think bringing in Daniel in is the fairest way for Red Bull to compare how good Yuki is. And I personally think that by the end of this season, based even just off the remaining races, they should know if Yuki or Daniel is probably going to be the better choice for them moving forward. And
I feel like
loses, to Lewis in the championship, he's going to get booted out of there, and whoever's done better out of Daniel and Yuki is probably going to end up in that seat, and Liam will be in the other one at AlphaTauri.
Yeah, I think you look at the Red Bull driver program, it's bottlenecked with Perez being where he is, to be honest, and not performing in what we've already discussed is the dominant car. So, like I said, I have nothing against Daniel. I love his charisma. I love his character. I think he's fantastic, and I think he's a great driver as well. That was nothing against Daniel specifically. I just feel like I said, when you've got an old driver not performing and not really looking like they're really giving that much to a team, that's where they've bottlenecked it. So it's. Yeah, put Daniel, if he's performing, put him in the main Red Bull. Yuki, if he beats Daniel for the rest of the season, put him in the main Red Bull. See how he goes. They did it with Gasly, they did it with Albon before, so I don't get why.
Well, the thing is, at this point as well, Yuki is in a much stronger position than Gasly or Albon. He's had 3-4 seasons in that car now. Albon and Gasly were shafted into that seat in their first or second seasons. Albon was halfway through his first, and I think Gasly was his second.
Second, yeah.
So Yuki should be more than experienced enough in Formula 1 in general to be pushed up into that seat now and not have that as an excuse. I just don't think the talent's there. But, don't get me wrong, I like Yuki. I think he's a fun driver to have on the grid. But I just don't think he's good enough to be in a top team. I think where he's at is probably his limit, unless Aston Martin get rid of Lance Stroll, which I don't really see happening. But with Honda going in there, I can see him moving across. That's about it. I can't really see him anywhere else other than AlphaTauri or Aston Martin with Honda if they get it.
Yeah, I feel like it's detrimental to the whole Red Bull driver program. The fact that they even started mentioning about poaching Lando from McLaren.
Oh, they've
just
been talking about
shows.
poaching Lando for years, though. He keeps turning
Yeah.
them down and getting more money from McLaren.
True, but it just shows that they've lost confidence in their own program, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Which isn't a great advert for all those young drivers, especially how many run that Red Bull livery in F2 and F3. To
Right.
think that they
I
might
think
might
Red
get
Bull are
all the way to
stopping.
F1.
I think they're stopping sponsoring drivers, Red Bull. I think I saw something about that over the last week. Potentially because it's just been such a failure for them over the last few years.
Yeah, young driver programs for teams, I think, is a great idea. They're just not trusting their own. That's for
But
me
also,
the
you
bottom
look at
line.
the talent that they have in Formula 2 at the moment, it's not that impressive. Like, you got Daruvla, who's in like his 3rd season in Formula 2
Yeah,
now,
he
and,
should have gone ages ago.
they're just not getting the people coming through. Liam Lawson is their best bet at another driver. And to be fair, he's been waiting for a while and he deserves his shot, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
I just think Yuki's had his chance at this point, in my opinion. Maybe he'll prove me wrong and beat Daniel convincingly over the rest of the season. We'll see. But yeah. Anyway, moving on to Q2.
I think we should maybe run this through in like quicker. I don't think we need to talk about all these points. I think this is just a general
just
point.
going to quickly go through the rest of quali. And
Yeah,
talk about the
absolutely.
sprint. So Perez only just beating Tsunoda through by 0.018. Shocking. Moving on from that, we've
agree.
already talked enough about Red Bull and their issues.
Yep.
Track limits, losing Daniel his lap in Q2. We've talked about track limits already.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like, if this is another person who potentially would have benefited from it being changed, but in my opinion, it's there for a reason. Stick to it.
Yeah.
Simple as.
Yeah.
That was the main talking points I had for Q2. Do you have anything else for
Yep.
Q2?
No, I think that's pretty much covered it. And then obviously the Q3 kind of was, 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 as teams go. I think I heard one of the commentators say that Noah and his arc would have been very proud. So yeah, you might look at that scenario and think, does that mean that this particular track is really sensitive to car performance more than necessarily what the drivers are doing? But I think with, like I said, Checo only beating Yuki by that amount shows that I think it might have just been a coincidence on this occasion, to be honest. Because I think only George really scraped through as well, who just didn't seem really to be on the pace the whole weekend as well.
As well for blocking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Q3 was a bit of an interesting one.
Yeah.
Max Verstappen, 6th. Interesting. Got his lap deleted for track limits.
Yeah, which obviously upset the FAA enough for them to get their white marker pens out and
extend that a little bit for Max.
Yeah.
Maxi taxi.
Can't have that on Saturday morning, can we? Absolutely
exactly.
not.
Yeah, can't upset the Dutch fans. It's interesting though. Max hasn't seemed that comfortable this weekend. I mean, it was quite interesting to hear his outburst about Checo on the radio as well, where he was like, "Checo's in my way," and Checo's like halfway down the straight. And I watched that at the back, and I was like, what are you moaning about? Like, he's no way interfering with your lap. He's starting his own lap.
I think it's just the aero wash. I think it was the aero wash into the final corner. He ran a bit wide and just lost a bit of the nose, which, obviously would have cost him maybe a tenth or two. I think the frustration there would have been that as a team, Checo is the only other car on the track that they can actually control where they are. And they couldn't even get their own car out the way to give him a clearer lap.
But equally, why are they not just telling him, just back off a little bit more, Like, why is it Checo's fault? It's the fact he got angry at Checo on there.
With Max being on his lap, they should have told Checo to go a little bit earlier on his flying lap. But, it's one of those things. It's nice to see Max under a little bit of pressure for once, which is nice. And it's funny to say that we've seen Max have a not great weekend, and he's still won the sprint and he's won the Grand Prix, shows the state that the F1 is in at the moment.
It does, and let's not take away from the fact Red Bull have built a monster of a car.
Absolutely,
and Max Verstappen
100%.
is driving the absolute wheels off of it.
100%.
Fair play, credit where credit's due. Hopefully next season is going to be closer, otherwise it's going to get very boring very quick. But yeah, I mean, looking at the rest of it, Leclerc getting pole for Ferrari. Got my Leclerc shirt on. Cursed him today. Always, whenever I wear this shirt, Leclerc has a bad week. I don't know why I even bother wearing it, but
He finished sixth or something, so
yeah,
in the race.
exactly.
So yeah, it wasn't exactly a good luck charm for him starting
No,
on pole.
exactly. But yeah, going really well, and the McLarens as well doing really well,
Hmm.
and the Mercs. So I mean, it seems to be not too bad. Like we had a few different teams that weren't Red Bull towards the front of the grid. So
Yeah, definitely a lot closer for sure, which is good to see, and bodes well for potentially the rest of the season, and especially with moving on to Mexico next weekend, you'll have like I said, mentioned earlier with the altitude, it means that and as you saw in the Mercedes dominance years as well, the pack always seem to close up in Mexico because the engine power, because it hasn't got as much sort of oxygen in the air, it's not creating the same amount of power difference to everyone else, so it does tend to close up with engine wise, and also the DRS is less effective, which are two of Red Bull's major sort of weapons, if you will, within this spec and this car. So I think next weekend bodes well as well, if on this particular track that they were able to sort of seem to bunch up a bit. So I am excited for next weekend and to see if hopefully that closes it up even more, and maybe even one of the other cars is better suited to the altitude and can actually be quicker than Red Bull throughout the whole weekend. That would be ideal for us.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're well overdue. Another win by someone else, aren't we? Let's put it that way. But yeah, moving on.
Singapore feels so long ago.
Oh, mate, it feels like another season ago at this point.
I know.
So moving on to the
Yes.
sprint shootout.
Yes, Saturdays.
Q1 and the sprint Stroll's radio. He is sounding really under the cosh. He obviously is feeling the pressure. I mean, the people who put up all the advertising boards for the Grand Prix ahead of it put Felipe Drugovich picture instead of his. Like clearly they thought he wasn't even going to show up. So he's definitely a driver under pressure, and it was showing, especially on the radio at least. You've also got Ricardo ahead of Yuki again. Yuki's radio message showing pressure. I mean, massive improvement from Aston Martin though over the qualifying from the day before. Like to get both cars higher up was much improvement. Just goes to show how much difference a day can make. And a few of the teams out there were saying actually that their cars performed differently depending on the amount of wind, which was quite interesting to see. So the Williams in particular, I think, was complaining a lot about how the wind affected their aerodynamics and stuff, and it just that car does not work in the wind, which is a weird thing to say, but yeah, it just doesn't perform.
But they have been saying that for a good couple of seasons now. I think I've heard Albon mention it quite a few times, where just when when the wind's really high, it seems to really unsettle them more than what seems to be a lot of the other teams. So interesting.
Williams supposed to be one of the better wind tunnels as well. They should really be able to work this out, but.
I'm not too sure. I'm not sure. I know Aston Martin now have a new wind tunnel in their new factory, but obviously that would have only just started working. So I think you can't really judge that side of development for them until sort of probably the middle of next season, when that really starts coming into its own. But yeah, McLaren have always had a good one, but. Yeah, I'm not too sure about Williams, to be honest. Obviously, being an independent, whether they're... I remember when James Vowles first went in there, and he said they were still using technology that was 20 years out of date. That they've had to use a lot of their budget to just try and upgrade the facilities as much as necessarily putting stuff on the car. But I think James Vowles has been an absolute revelation going into Williams. He seems to really stabilise the team. He's certainly given Albon a great sort of platform to drive with a bit more confidence, and seems to be very nurturing as well, which is quite nice. When he was working for Mercedes, was very open and was happy to kind of, when they made a mistake, he was on, he'd post videos and saying, look, we got this wrong, here's why. Very open with it and very honest, and he's definitely taken that across the Williams, which is really nice to see.
Taking away that blame culture that Williams had a little bit, I feel, going on. He's also fought quite strongly for Williams to get, and for a few of the other teams to get that extra allowance of money to allow them to upgrade things. Because I know that, I can't remember if you remember or not, but he was talking about how behind Williams were on just like things like tracking parts that are in development and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's now been approved that they're allowing an extra budget allowance for some of the teams to get some more money to help with these little bits that they're behind on, to help them catch up to the big boys a little bit, which is quite. He's been a big fighter for that. So.
Well, that's the thing. It's when they're so far behind the bigger teams, and then the cost cap comes in, they've got less money to try and catch up. Even if they get a big sponsor, like they got bought out by Doriliton, they can't use necessarily all of that clout because they've got to stay within the cost budget. So, and that's going to make it arguably slower for them to catch up with the other teams, which is a bit of a shame. They didn't get bought out slightly earlier and could have done that before the cost cap come in and spent as like basically blown a massive budget, but at least then sort of started the cost cap era on a more level playing field. But it is what it is. And like I said, I think they're doing the best that they can in the with what they've got at the moment and within the rules, and doesn't seem to be going over on their catering budget either, which is great. So
no caviar at Williams.
Yeah, definitely no caviar at Williams. No.
But going back to the sprint qualifying, I mean,
yes.
Yuki just had a bit of a messy one in general, didn't he? Like he had a moment with Hamilton where I'm still not sure watching it back if they actually hit or not. I don't think they did.
Again, it goes back to what we started with.
He missed the lights starting his last lap, so he didn't get a chance to improve. Bit of a disaster for him there in that sense.
Yeah, it goes back to again that dawdling on the second last corner. You know, it's dangerous, but also he was trying to find a gap, but also block Lewis from overtaking him and filling the gap that he just made. And I get it's obviously frustrating, and I've heard in the past that there's a gentleman's agreement in place to.
There's no gentleman in motorsport.
That's good. Well, that's fine to say in a driver's briefing, to turn around to everyone and say, "Oh yeah, no, we'll do this, do that." But when you're actually there on the track and you can see that they're counting down, and basically you've got one more slot left and two cars jostling for it, I'm sorry, but in every single scenario, when as driver on the game, and I'm going for that gap. I don't really care who I'm pissing off on the to take it essentially.
You don't care who you're pissing off when you're trying to go for your quali lap. Was that?
It's ironic. Bear in mind,
I have that on tape.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. But it's at the end of the day, it's
Yeah, I know what you mean. At the end of the day, we're, as drivers, I mean, I say we as drivers. I'm in the game, but drivers in general, you're looking out for your number one. You don't really care about anyone else. At the end of the day, if you need to get a lap in and you're worried about not making it, you're going to do what you have to do to get that lap in. So.
Yeah, I mean, look at no one's going to turn around to Logan Sargent and be like, "Oh, you finished 20th in the championship. You didn't score any points, but we're going to keep you in the seat because you were really nice about giving people other people." Yeah, exactly. No one's going to do that. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely not. So yes, of course, there's an element of if everyone can have a fair shot, then great. But there's going to be times like that where you're going to be a bit more feisty to make sure you're in that snow. You're not the one that loses out. And I like to see it. Granted, I don't like to see it in the sense of front wings getting knocked off. I think and actively driving him across other cars to try and block them. I don't agree with that, but at the same time, this is part of the whole issue with Delta times, with the qualifying format as a whole, which we've already discussed anyway. I think it just goes back to that at the end of the day, and there's ways in which they could make changes that this wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be part of the scenario. So yeah.
Completely.
We've kind of covered that as well.
Moving on to Q2, Max Verstappen having a spin.
He
seemed to be feeling the pressure, didn't he? Only had him having a go at Checo. He's another spin. He's not the smooth operator, as Carlos Sainz would say, that we've seen all season.
No.
Is this related to him though, or is it showing that there's an issue with the track? And that it's a little bit uneven. If you watch the replay, it's kind of bouncing
very
all over
bumpy.
the place.
It was massively
Ferraris
bumpy.
Definitely, if you look on the onboards, their heads are going like this the whole bloody time.
I
mean, part of me wants to go, well, no one else did it, so.
Well, this is the thing. It's yes, the track's really bumpy, but it's the same for everyone.
Yeah.
So and there were other people Oscar had an issue in practice. around at the very same point, and didn't manage to spin it, but as good as, and kind of went on the grass and kind of ruined his tires or whatever. So yeah, people were struggling there, but it's the same for everyone, and they all managed to get through a race with all the pressures of racing and didn't manage to do it. So I think, like I said, it shows that, and it was a good sign that, for me personally, to think that I've been saying for a long time, which is, I've been told many times by especially Max fans and Red Bull fans that, oh well, Max has really taken his mistakes out of his driving and that's why he's more consistent. But and now, suddenly Lewis is making more mistakes. But Lewis wasn't making the mistakes when that Mercedes was dominant. I think people are forgetting that when you have a dominant car, you don't have to push. You can leave a little bit in there. Yeah, you can drive at 98% and still get pole week in, week out. Like I said, especially if you don't have a massively competitive teammate, you can drive at that. Just give that extra little percent, just leave a little bit towards track limits, just to make sure, give yourself a bit of leeway, and you're still going to be the fastest, or at least right up in the sharp end. But when you are driving at 100%, you do need to squeeze out that every last little half, a quarter of a tenth even, to try and get the very, very best out of your lap. Sometimes you're going to push it too far and you're going to go over the limit.
Absolutely.
And that's something that...
first time we've seen this from Max either. Like, look back at when he was on fire in the 2021 season.
Yeah.
And he absolutely threw it on the wall on that magical lap he was doing. Like, that lap was incredible. He just taps the wall.
Jeddah Saudi Arabia, the last corner. Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. Like, obviously, you're trying to squeeze absolutely everything out the lap. Mistakes are much more likely to happen. So I think you need to remember that, when you have a dominant car and you see drivers just not making mistakes and being more consistent, that's just part of the nature of having a more dominant car and just not having to push to the limit. Yeah. And when you're driving within the limit, you're not going to make the mistakes. It's as simple as that. And that's why I think, it's nice to see when Max has had it so much his own way all season that when there is a race that isn't quite there for them, like as in they're not quite so massively out into the distance, he is feeling the pressure a bit, and he is having to drive at that extra couple of percent to get the very best out of the lap time, and still not necessarily ending up on pole, even though that lap would have. But he locked up in turn one as well. That kind of mistake, and for the first half of the season, you just weren't seeing that. And up until now, we're in this is race 19 of the season, previous 18 minus Singapore. Yeah, you just didn't see him making mistakes because he didn't need to. He didn't have to push that hard. So.
Exactly.
But
looking at the rest of Q2, I mean, Daniel Ricciardo just missing out on Q3 on his first weekend back. I mean, he was disappointed about it on the radio as well. You could hear that. That shows he's got that fire still. I think that time he's had out has really helped him, and hopefully, he hasn't lost anything from the injury, and that once he's back in the swing of things, we'll have the Daniel Ricciardo of old that we saw glimpses of in Hungary and stuff like that. Coming back, and that'd be quite nice to see. We also had Albon, who actually made it through to Q3 in the Williams after having gone out in like P18, I think it was, in the qualifying the day before, and that surely is obviously him learning a little bit from looking back at what happened, but maybe a huge chunk is the fact that the wind was so much different on the Saturday compared to the Friday. But fantastic from him getting to Q3, and equally Fernando Alonso not making it to Q3, which meant he didn't make it to Q3 in the quali or the sprint quali, which was probably why he then went, I want the old car back, please. But, we don't know. Fernando Alonso is an enigma that only Fernando Alonso really understands. So, also looked a bit like the Mercs are struggling on the Saturday in Q2, but I'm pretty sure both of them made it through, if memory serves me correctly. So Q3, I don't really have much talking points in Q3, other than the fact that in the sprint quali we have to run medium, soft. I feel like may have suited some teams a bit better. The top four at the end of it were looking close. Like, I can't remember the exact times, but I'm pretty sure it was within a tenth of a second or something like that between.
Definitely the top three within a tenth, and I think. Fourth place, Lando was 1.2 tenths out.
I mean, it's
Oh,
still
very close.
incredibly close. And
Yeah, I mean, when you think a
what we
blink
wanna
of an
see-
eye is a tenth of a second.
Yeah, that's what we want every
Uh,
week, please. Can we have
yeah.
that every week?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's it for the sprint qualifying, and then let's move on to the sprint race.
Races.
Max won. Did we expect anything else, really? No, probably not.
Max won.
I
Ruined
do
it.
think it was quite interesting to see quite how strongly he tried to push Leclerc off the track in the first
Yeah.
little stint. I think that showed just how much he was worried about that Ferrari getting ahead of him. Yeah, what do we think about that? Like, he pushed him into the pit exit. That seemed a little bit, I don't know.
On the edge?
On the edge, yeah, probably the way to say it. Is it fair? Is it not? I mean, realistically, in the race, you can cross that line. It's only crossing it coming out of the pits that's the issue. So probably I would say it is fair. It was just very overly aggressive onto the first.
Yeah. Yeah, do you know what? One thing that came out at the end of Saturday, I saw an interview with Charles Leclerc, and he turned around and said, "Yeah, it was an aggressive move by Max. He kind of left me nowhere to go." And but again, like, do we expect anything else from Max in that scenario? But I liked the way that, you know, Charles came back and said, "I would have done exactly the same to him in that scenario." So, yeah,
With that in mind, that puts that to bed, really, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
If he's not upset by it, then we shouldn't really be either, should we? So.
Like I said, and you know, them squabbling over there let Lewis kind of almost drive right around the outside of both of them. So, and Lando was also getting
this
the
time
mix.
what you couldn't do in what's it called? I can't remember what the last race was before that now. What was the last race?
Oh,
Qatar.
Qatar, yeah.
He almost managed to do what he couldn't do in Qatar.
Yes, almost.
But yeah, so it was interesting to see that. Sainz going for the gamble on the softs didn't really pay off. He moved forward and then he moved back. He stayed exactly where he was. So 6th start, 6th finish. Didn't really do anything other than probably tell Ferrari that this is not a tyre we want for the race.
But I like to see them. You know, it could have been very good. You know, if that soft tyre had lasted and had given him loads more grip. He did get up to 4th to start with, and then fell back those 2 places again. But I like the ambition that they were like, do you know what? He's 6th. It's not really that many points for 6th, let's be honest. So I think there's only 3 points for 6th. So, yeah, him trying something a bit different and it not working out, I don't blame him for that. It's nice to see somebody, especially like seeing the whole list, medium, soft, and then the whole rest medium as well. You know what? It's nice to see a bit of variation. It added some extra little something. Is the soft tire gonna turn out to be a great shout, and he's gonna turn around and win, like be able to just drive around everyone on the softer compounds? So, yeah, I'm up for that. I'm for that. So.
It's fair enough. It's always
That's
nice
fine.
to see someone try a different strategy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It just didn't pay off for him. And the
Yeah,
race
unfortunately
this time.
not this time, no.
George, track limits. Do we think Merck should have told him straight away to give it back? I'm personally of the opinion of yes, they should have. I'm actually this is something that annoys me, right? And I want to get your opinion on it actually. Track limits, right? 5 second penalty. Is it fair that I could cut a corner, overtake you, and get 5 seconds up the road, and not have any penalty effectively from this, whereas you wouldn't have been able to pass me? Like, think of it like Monaco. If you cut the chicane at Monaco and overtook someone and were able to get 5 seconds ahead of them, but you wouldn't have been able to pass them if you hadn't done that. I don't feel like the 5 second penalty is the right penalty for leaving the track and getting overtaking someone. I think if it's leaving the track getting an advantage but you haven't overtaken, so like you've managed to close the gap, 5 seconds penalty is fair. But I think if you've actually physically passed someone, there needs to be a greater penalty, because otherwise what's to stop people just doing that, especially like Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen's stuck behind a Ferrari. He can just go, oh, well, I know if I get in clean air I can get 10 seconds up the road, so I'll just cut this corner. I don't feel like it's the right penalty for this situation. I think there needs to be a stricter penalty in place for overtaking a driver off the track.
So, taking off my Mercedes fan cap for a second, I do see where you're coming from, but I do feel that the next penalty up of 10 seconds, also in the same vein, sounds a bit excessive. And certainly drive through is massively
But
like
would they then do it? That's the thing. Like if
No,
if
no.
you put a 10-second, or if you said, okay, if you overtake someone off the track and it's a drive-through, Mercedes would have been on that so quick to get George to give it back. It would have been unreal.
Yes, I do see where you're coming from, but obviously that 5 second place did cost George a place in the end.
Yes.
Granted, it wasn't actually too. I think was it Gasly that he
I
overtook?
think it was Piastri who overtook,
Piastri.
and Gasly was the one who.
Oh
was
yes,
coming
no,
out
you're
anyway.
yeah. So even though it wasn't actually Piastri that he lost the place back to, he did actually lose a place due to that scenario because he wasn't 5 seconds up
But
the
then
road from that place.
equally, would he have been a place further back if he hadn't been able to get past Piastri at that time? Would Gasly have got him? Would it have affected other things? You see what I mean? Like it's all a knock-on effect, and it's not really punishing the driver to just give him a 5 second penalty. There's enough cars up there. Like if instead of it being a Merc, it was a Williams, and he wasn't able to get that far ahead, then yeah, fair. But say it's a Williams in 10th place, and that Merc can overtake him by cutting the corner. That Williams is then losing all their points. That's not fair, in my opinion. For a five seconds, that a Mercedes in clean air could definitely pull away from a Williams. And
it's definitely a tough question. And this scenario, when George was that much quicker than Oscar, especially Oscar with damage as well, he as soon as he went all four wheels off the track in that particular scenario, I do think he should have let Oscar go, but round the outside. Like they could have gone 2x2 round that sort of triple apex corner. And he could have essentially let Oscar keep the place for one more corner because he probably would have gotten down into turn one. Yeah, being that close behind him. So I think that was a bit of an error of judgment from George and the team because the team could have easily told him that as well. So in that particular scenario with George's overspeed, I absolutely agree with you there. It was just a bit impatient and just a bit silly, really, as much as anything else. But the problem with this scenario is on the other side of it. Yes, you don't want to see cars passing other cars off the track and essentially not feeling a penalty for it, even if they get handed a penalty, not affecting them or whatever. Because like you say, it's not a deterrent, and that's where the issue is. But then you've got George was trying to go around the outside of him in that corner, and whether it's part of the damage that caused him to go there, or whether it was defending it, or whatever. Granted, George wasn't completely alongside, so Oscar had the right to take his line, but essentially he drove to the edge of the track. So George had to go completely off the track to avoid a collision, which is, sensible. You're always going to avoid a collision. So the point I'm trying to make is that in the defending scenario, if you have too much of a penalty, you're going to get people who are defending are just going to force people off the track because they don't seem to be penalising, forcing off other drivers off the track as much as they used to.
But then
so I think it's a knock-on effect. I think it's a knock-on effect from that also not getting penalised enough. Is that some cars are feeling like they have to go all four wheels off the track to even give themselves a chance because basically. Yeah, the defending cars just and I found this watching especially Lewis and Max when they were fighting. Max would just drive Lewis cleanly off the road to keep the place, and absolutely no repercussions. Especially Haman jumped straight to Brazil when Max basically they both drove they almost ended up in Argentina. How far they went wide off the end of that corner, and Lewis it was just mad, and absolutely no penalty at all for Max driving Lewis. He could have even just said, "Look, give Lewis the place."
I can tell you're a Mercedes fan because you brought it back to Max v Lewis again. But no, I mean, my original point is, I just feel like they need to make the penalty harsher, and maybe they need to introduce a penalty for pushing people off the road as well. Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what anyone else thinks. So if you're watching, put in the comment, what do you think in regards to overtaking off the track? Is the 5 second penalty fair, or would you like to see something a bit tougher, like a 10-second or a drive-through? Because I'm intrigued to see what other people think about this.
Yeah. Okay.
But moving on anyway.
Yes.
We are talking about the sprint race. That's where we were. Haas upgrade, not paying off. We've kind of touched on that already. It just does not seem to have worked in the race either on the sprint, which I think is why they chose to start from the pit lane for the race and tweak a few things. We'll get to the race in a second. Interesting to see the brakes fail on the Aston Martin for Stroll. That's a bit of a worrying sign for them for the rest of the season. If the
especially in the shortest race, not even in the full race, the short race. So I agree.
Something to be looked at there. But on the nicer side of things, we saw some good overtakes from Daniel Ricciardo, some good racecraft there. So it looks definitely, like I said before, he's got his passion back a bit.
You can tell you're a Ricciardo fan, can't you? I think if you've brought this up like 5 times.
Look.
And he finished like 14th.
My boy's back. I don't care. He's back. He had some great. To be fair though, the overtakes were pretty great. The ones I saw, and the fighting was brilliant as well. Max was way quicker than everyone else, and I think I wasn't the only one who was left at the end of the sprint very depressed by the continuation of Max Verstappen dominance in our sport.
It was very interesting to see that he could pull 10 seconds out on everyone in the sprint. Yeah, he couldn't in the race. Whether that braking issue he had in the race was that affecting him that much, but you'd think if you can, in a whatever it was, like 18, 19 lap race or whatever it was, for the sprint. And he can sprint,
So I'm going to tell you exactly what the difference was, right?
Go on.
Tyre type. He was struggling on the hard tyres. So in the sprint, he was on the mediums, was storming through. On the race, he was on the mediums, he was storming through the pack, and then he swapped to the hards, and he was complaining towards the end about the hard tyre. So if you listen to the cool-down room, he also said in there, I think, something about the hard tyre as well, and how he didn't like it. He definitely seemed to prefer the medium over the hard, which could be interesting if we have any more races with these compounds in particular, to see if they try to work away so he doesn't have to use the hards again.
Or will the other teams maybe learn to try and push Red Bull to use the hards because they know that they're obviously not as comfortable on them. Hopefully we'll see maybe something like that.
Yeah. Right, finally, we're making it to the race an hour and a half into our video here. So maybe we need to make these into. Maybe we should do one after quali and one after the race in future. But lessons learned.
And after the sprint as
well. Maybe we should do one on a Saturday and one on a Sunday. So race Logan Sargent. I keep talking about Logie. The cars starting from the pits meant that he started 16th on the grid, right? 16th on the grid. 8 laps in, he's been overtaken by 2 of those cars already, and they started from the pit lane. It's just not good enough. It's just, I do not understand, other than the fact that Williams don't know who else to put in that seat. I can't see why he has that seat at the moment for next year. The only reason I think he has that seat next year is that Williams can't find someone better. Prove me wrong. Who would you put in that seat other than Logan Sargent at the moment that would be an improvement? Because Mick Schumacher, I think he's just going to crash more. Simple. I
think Mick Schumacher is a better bet than Logan. If I'm completely honest, especially with what we've seen, especially if you think back to Ocon, who had a year out, came back a much more mature driver, and he's also been sat with the Mercedes team. Obviously, engine provider for Williams, so within that kind of family, Mick's probably been able to learn a lot, see all the data from the Mercedes team as well. I think that's a better option for them, and I think that would be definitely something that Toto will be pushing for. Will be to put Mick into that seat, whether Williams will, with the sponsorship and with the apparent need for F1 to have at least one American driver on the grid, seems just to be and Deriliton,
another team in. Sorry, what?
Yeah. Well, there's also that thing. Deriliton are an American company who bought Williams, so maybe they're the ones that are stipulating there has to be an American driver. But you've got, I watch a bit of IndyCar as well, and you've got drivers like Colton Herta and people who are over there doing
Again, if Andretti are let in, they said they're going to bring Colton Herta with them as one of the things they've said.
Yeah, it's definitely top of their list
we'll
as
see
well.
What comes on. I think maybe we'll do another video and talk about all of the Andretti feelings that we have towards it. 'Cause I think that could be
And
a
just
video in
adding
itself.
more teams to the grid, I think that's a big talking point that I know we've mentioned between the two of us. So
Yeah, I think that's maybe we do another video on that for another day because I think we could be here for another hour just talking about that.
I could talk for weeks on how much that scenario annoys me. So yes, carry on.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So let's move on from Logan.
Yes.
McLaren failure on their car. Piastri out of the race. What's going on there? What do you think? Like, is this a sign of bad things to come for the next few races for McLaren? Are they struggling with the higher temperatures or something? I mean, they managed to get through Qatar, so surely it's not a temperature thing. Something has gone wrong with that McLaren. Is this a worry?
I did hear that the issue with Piastri was caused by the contact with Ocon. So that would kind
They took
of
each other out of the race then.
yeah. Well, I mean, definitely the onboard that you saw from Oscar's car. He left depending on where your opinion lies on who was at fault for that, I think it was just a racing incident personally for me. It's a tight, twisty section that they're about to go into, and you're jostling for who gets there first, and especially on the first lap, as it being turn 3 or whatever it is, or turn 2, coming out of turn 2 towards 3. There's always tends to be a little bit of argy-bargy in that section. So, yeah, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with it in that sense, but it's just a racing incident, and Piastri's left front seemed to leave a big sort of tire mark on the side pod of Ocon's car, and obviously which you saw when he had to retire. From what I heard from commentary as well, from what I was listening to, they did mention that Piastri's issues did appear to be caused by that as well. So I don't think it's an inherent problem with the McLaren, especially obviously Lando didn't seem to have any issues that way throughout the race. So I think it was just a kind of incident caused by the contact. Whether McLaren have a soft car in the sense of, can't take a bit of sort of, getting knocked into, or that might be something for them to look at. They might have made it a bit too delicate, which we have seen in the past, especially thinking of back when Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya had their McLarens. That car was ridiculously fast, and arguably faster than the Ferraris, but it didn't finish half the race as it started. So yeah, so maybe there's an element of that, but I wouldn't be too concerned. I think that was more of an issue with the contact. Yeah,
that's fair enough. So we've already briefly talked about people being pushed off track limits there. Did Max push Charles off, do you reckon? I think it was touch and go. I think it was just fair. But he definitely, if Charles doesn't pull out of that, they hit. And
yeah,
that's very much Max's style, I know.
Yeah, I messaged you during the race. It's one of those things. I find Max's driving style, don't get me wrong, Senna is one of my absolute heroes in F1. I agree with Lewis, is in the sense of Senna was one of the all-time greats of the sport, but his driving style, his character on the track as a driver, would be, I'm going to put my car here in this maybe even potentially very small closing gap, and if you don't get out of it, we're going to have a crash, but I'm leaving that in your court. That is up to you. I'm putting it there whether you like it or not, and it's your choice to get out or not of the way, basically. Yeah. And I find Max very, very similar. I don't like making that comparison. I'm not a huge Max Verstappen fan, if you haven't noticed already. But from a completely impartial way, and credit to Max, I think he's adopted that driving character very similar, in a very similar vein. And, you just saw, even within this whole race itself, you saw Lewis not taking that dive to the inside in turn 1 when he was desperately trying to get through Charles, and potentially, lost enough time that meant he couldn't catch Max at the end. So, cost him that gap at the end, not making that same dive that I think Max would have made. And that's the difference there. But I think part of, again, with what happened with Senna, what happens with Max, as you see now, Max, he's going to make that dive. So arguably, you're already getting out of the way of it before he's even made it, which makes it that much easier. So it's a bit sad to see that it's come to that. I think more people need to just flip and turn in on him, and then maybe he'll learn not to make those dives. But especially when
the way that for the sports news we go at the moment, with Max Verstappen being the fanboy of everyone, it'd probably end up being that driver will just get absolutely penalised the hell out of. But I do see your point, and it's definitely something not right there. I do think it was very on the nose. I think Max was just ahead and therefore is entitled to do that.
Yeah.
But again, if Charles doesn't decide to suddenly turn to the right to pull away, then they're colliding and they're both out. So
yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, yes, there's having to drive off track to just even, avoid a crash, and then once you've done that, you're in a side-by-side scenario, and you've had to drive off the track to avoid a collision. Are you allowed to keep fighting that if you've had to go off track? Where essentially, if Charles had driven off the track and then managed to get back past Max, would he have had to given it back anyway, or got a 5-second penalty for passing him off the track, or gaining an advantage by being off the track because he wouldn't have been there? That's the point where this rule, for me, as I was explaining earlier, is where it struggles, and they're quite interlinked in the sense of people aren't getting punished enough for pushing car, not leaving enough space on the outside, to the point where defenders can just push people off the track to, keep their place, which is forcing cars to be out there. Where, like you say, if that was Monaco, it'd be a barrier.
Yeah, was it Fernando Alonso always says, all of the time you have to leave it the space.
You have to live with the space.
So
yeah.
I mean, there's definitely something that needs to be done there.
I think they need to look at the two things side by side. I know there's always going to be times where it's really touch and go with, I did leave you enough space. You could have kept 2 of your wheels on the track, and you decided to go farther than you had to. But yeah, I think you need to look at the two things side by side and try and work out a better way of keeping it fair. If you're going to penalise people for having to drive off the track, who aren't willing to just give up on the overtake or the defence as it would be, then I think you equally need to look at those people who are forcing them to have to be there in the first place.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and I do agree with you. That needs to all be looked at as a whole.
Yeah.
Going back to the race, Perez consistently whining throughout the race on team radio it's just getting a bit embarrassing for him at this point, really.
You are not going to make a lot of Mexican friends, my friend.
I know I'm not going to make a lot of Mexican friends. And do you know what? I really wish that Perez was better so I didn't have to make these comments. But he's just not. He's not there. And, I wish he was, but I'm getting fed up with hearing him moaning on the radio. Just fucking pass people. Stop moaning about them going off and just pass them. Like, Max is doing it. Everyone else is doing it. Just pass them. I actually think out of that whole race, he overtook one person on track. Like, I think he started 9th, he finished 7th. We had 2 retirements that were cars in front of him, and that he overtook. I think Gasly overtook him, and he re-overtook him. That is appalling.
And he only really got that overtake because he was following George through.
That's what I mean. Like, honestly, this guy's supposed to be fighting for a seat, and at the moment, he's literally having a Sunday drive. Like,
yeah,
what is this?
I know we've covered this a lot already, but I think there's an element of this is absolutely indicative, and you see similar in Logan in the sense of a driver driving without confidence. Just you just don't push the brake as much, and I mean that as obviously they push the brake as much, but they don't push the limit of braking in the braking zones enough to get themselves alongside some of those other drivers who are far more confident and comfortable within their car, whether it's setup or whether it's just the inherent design of the car. I think that's part of it. He's clearly under pressure. He's arguably at the moment he's more worried about making a mistake like he did in Japan and having one of those races where he makes a silly dive, turns someone around, damages and loses several front wings. Clearly he's driving without confidence, and learnt from that scenario of a sense of, it's better to stay behind that guy but stay in the race, which there is of course an element of that.
There is, and maybe he's just thinking he just needs to pick up points to stop Lewis overtaking him. If he picks up points consistently, maybe he won't have that issue.
He should have been up with Lewis, that's the point. And
this is it, like, there's no fire. There's no fire in the man. Go back to the beginning of the season, and what's happened? Like, what happened to that Perez? The Perez who was winning races. He's just gone.
Yeah, I think you'll see fire with Perez next weekend in his home Grand Prix.
I really
I think
hope
that's
so.
I think
I would
that's
absolutely
yeah.
hate to see him not make Q3 in Mexico. I think that'd be the most depressing thing on the planet. And I really
Yeah.
hope that he can put it front row.
Like I said, I reckon that with the altitude difference, as mentioned, I think the field will be closer packed together, and I don't think Red Bull will have as much dominance. So I am fearful that if, even with a dominant car, he's just scraping through or not getting through into Q3, that there's a good chance he could be even further down the pack with that even less sort of advantage from the car itself. However, I really hope to see, I really do hope to see that crowd gives him the extra couple of tenths that he needs, and he is right on the bat. I don't expect him to be beating Max, but I think the home crowd will hopefully push him further towards Max and kind of counter that less dominant car element of it. So
yeah, I mean,
I really hope
see
so.
if the rumours that we've been hearing floating around come out to be true. If he announces his retirement at Mexico, maybe that's why the fire's gone. He's checked out already. He's thinking he's going. But to be fair, if you haven't heard, there's about 100 rumours related to Sergio Perez and his seat going round at the moment. I've heard everyone from being Albon linked to going back. I've heard of Alonso being linked to it, Lando linked to it. Heck, I'm sure bloody next door neighbour's grandma's probably been linked to it at this point. Like, it's a bit of a ridiculous situation.
Yeah, but your next door's grandma is very quick though.
I
to
mean,
be
you should
fair.
see her on the scooter. Man.
Oh, I do.
Takes
Yeah.
those corners like right on the apex.
Yeah, love
But at the end of the day, there's a reason that there's so many rumours flying around. It's because he's not performing. He needs to do something, and if he isn't retiring, which personally, I don't want to see him retire, but I don't think he needs to be in that Red Bull seat. I think he needs to step back from Red Bull, and Sauber with the Audi program coming in, he could potentially go to there, maybe build a team around him and have it as his team. I think that's the situation he works best in. Like when he was at Racing Point, he was the lead driver. It was tailored towards him, and that seemed to suit him a bit more. Maybe that's what he needs, just like Albon, like Gasly, just to get out of the Red Bull atmosphere, and maybe that'll bring back the Sergio Perez of old. Don't get me wrong, I'd love for him to suddenly come alive at the Mexican Grand Prix, steal a win from Max. That'd be brilliant. I'd cheer him the whole way. But at the moment, I'm seeing a worse gap between him and Max than I saw between Lewis and Bottas at any point during their career. And
yeah, I'd agree with that.
You've got to be sat there thinking, well, Mercedes got rid of Bottas and he was performing better. Your days are probably numbered unless you really pick it up. And again, as I said, it's really strange that the drop off. Yeah. Like beginning of the season, we were talking about, is Perez going to be a contender here for the championship? And 3 races later, no was the answer. It just dropped off dramatically, and it's really sad to see. But yeah, I don't really know where he goes from here if he doesn't pick it up.
Yeah, I wasn't sure when I heard the rumor that he was potentially retiring and announcing it in Mexico. But obviously, when you hear a rumor like that, you're like, oh well, no smoke without fire. However, I've seen things coming out that he's said 100% I am racing with Red Bull for 2024, and like his seat is already secured and everything like that. So it's very conflicting.
Sebastian Vettel said similar things about Aston Martin before he then retired. So
yeah, fair, yeah. So and like I said, I didn't really pay as much attention to when this apparent release from Perez saying he was definitely driving next year might have been clipped from way early in the season. So who knows? I don't know, to be completely honest. But it seems strange that even Christian Horner was willing to accept or at least come out and with a statement as to why someone as feisty as Fernando Alonso, who would not settle for being a number 2, would be a bad teammate for Max. I think realistically, Horner, if there wasn't any smoke or if there wasn't any fire behind potentially Perez leaving, he would have just said it's irrelevant. Perez isn't going. Yeah. So I feel straight. Again, there's little things that I hear that I'm just like, I'm like, oh no, it's definitely not going to happen. And then, just even little things like that. It's like, why did Horner even entertain that scenario of considering whether Alonso could go into that seat, obviously coming out and saying no because, but why wouldn't you just say, well, it's Perez's seat and he's definitely driving next year? Like,
exactly.
Seems
It's a
strange.
bit
So,
odd, isn't
who
it?
knows? We'll find out next week. Okay, 'cause it's the
Exactly. It is
president.
literally a week away, so if he's going to do it, we'll find out then.
Yeah. And tune in for this next week.
Well, exactly, yeah. After
And
the
we'll
race.
talk all about it.
And after quali as well.
Yes.
Okay, going back to the race, we've got a few more points to go through.
Yes.
Let's try and get through them before it's 1 a.m. like I joked about earlier. It actually might be.
We've got 25 minutes till 1 o'clock.
Right, let's go rush through a few things.
Yes.
Lewis pushing too hard on the hards to get Lando. Do you think he could have gone longer and made the one-stop work if he hadn't done that? Or do you reckon it was always going to have to pit?
From Mercedes' point of view, I think if they'd mirrored Red Bull, I think they knew that they weren't going to beat Red Bulls, so they had to do something different. But quickly worked out that the one stop was not going to work. So when you bail out of a strategy call like that and you haven't prepared from it from the start, I think you're always on the back foot. I think Lewis did amazingly well to get back to where he did. I think I kept on saying, everyone saying he's a COTA master, Circuit of the Americas master and expert, and he's good everywhere, but specifically this track. And I think that showed today. I think to be fair, if you even you compare Lewis to George, and George has been pretty similar pace to Lewis most of the year, or at least comparable, way more so than Perez and Max. So. And and Lewis is 7-time world champion, so for George to be there, I think is amazing for George, and even beat him in the championship last year. Yeah, I think the world of George, I think, is brilliant. So I think it just showed. I think today we need to sit back and just say Lewis just did a fantastic job. And yeah, there were errors in there, like pushing too hard and went wide, didn't get Charles quick enough. And had to follow him through all that first sector and wide into the hairpin before the straight, which lost him possibly a whole second, at least like a good chunk of a second. And what could have been without those, you do sort of have to ask yourself. But at the same time, without Lewis doing everything else in the race, I don't think anybody else in that seat would have been anywhere near where Lewis did actually finish. So
it's a fair point to take into account, and let's hope this is actually a improvement from Mercedes as a whole, and not just because Lewis is so great at COTA.
It worries me a little bit with where George was.
Yeah, George was quite a bit off the pace, but then George has always struggled at COTA. So
yes, agreed.
Again, maybe next weekend's gonna be the real show. Hopefully, it's a real thing of Mercedes getting back in the fight, and we can see a repeat of a bit of racing that we got in 2021. Hopefully a bit cleaner though.
And less Michael Massey.
Well, no Michael Massey, unless some weird shenanigans happen. Moving on, Red Bull undercut really worked. Red Bull undercut really worked well. But an example of the one-stop strategy and sticking with it that didn't work was, and I'm going to say his name again, is Daniel Ricciardo, where AlphaTauri kind of split the strategy between him and Yuki. Yuki got the two-stop, and Daniel was on a one-stop until very late in the race. Before the pit stop round, he was running 10th. I think Yuki was 9th. They were quite both of them in the points. It was looking really strong for them. But then after the stops, and trying to hang on to the hards, he was down to 15th. Eventually dropped down to right near the back of the grid, and they used him as a guinea pig to see if they could go faster on the softs. After realising they did, they put Yuki on them, got fastest lap, got 2 points in the bag. So, I mean, it's an interesting way of splitting the strategy. It kind of guaranteed that if either strategy worked, there was a chance they were going to get points, which is good. And then I quite liked the fact that, okay, his race is fucked anyway. Let's see if we can test something with him and for Yuki, and then for it to work. It's quite nice and refreshing to see AlphaTauri thinking a little bit for once, whereas sometimes you just kind of go, is anyone in control of this team when you watch their races? So it's an interesting way to recover that and get something out of what ended up not being a good strategy, I thought.
They're the P11 specialists, aren't they? And
so to get to P10,
which is unfortunately part of all the Zero Club. So they have really struggled with points this year. So I think, yeah, it shows. It's a shame they had to sacrifice one to sort of work out that the other was going to work. But in a position that team is, yeah, they've got, yeah, the proof's in the pudding. They got 2 points, obviously one from the fastest lap. So fair play to him. Yeah, we don't like to see donor drivers or people being sacrificed for a result, but I think at the end of the day, when there's so many millions between finishing 7th and 8th and 9th and all those positions, then I think it goes back to the whole thing of it's gentlemanly up until the point when it is actually going to affect you massively, and then it's a brutal sport. You got to look after number one, and
absolutely.
So it is what it is, unfortunately. But
Equally,
fair play to AlphaTauri. To good, well done for getting points today when they've struggled throughout the year.
Absolutely, but equally, they wouldn't have got those points if it wasn't for the issues at Aston Martin and Alonso having to return P7.
Absolutely.
It was a good recovery from Aston Martin in general. When you look at where they were at the sprint and then having to start from the pit lane and stuff like that, to actually have both cars running in the top 10, looking like they were on for a solid points haul, which let's keep in mind, they haven't had a solid points haul for quite a while now.
Since the summer break, really.
I think Stroll hasn't scored a point since the summer break. Like, something like that. It's ridiculous. So, interesting again. Stroll seems to have got his mojo back with this new car. But then Alonso was one position ahead of him in the old car. Now, is this that they have designed a car for Stroll, like I said earlier, and that the old car suited Alonso better? Or is it just sheer dumb luck that they've ended up both next to each other? What's your thoughts on the matter? I mean, Stroll's been consistently off Alonso for a very long time until this weekend. So,
yeah, I mean, I think Aston Martin, as we mentioned earlier, suffered from the lack of practice sessions, to be honest, to really get a hold of those upgrades and work out how to set the car up around them. So I think that was possibly their biggest issue. And hopefully with a sort of more standard weekend next weekend, like I said, we've talked about the altitude and stuff, so it won't be necessarily 100% representative, but at least they'll have the same amount, like a decent amount of practice time to get a better handle on what they've got and what they've sort of upgraded it with. So, but I think obviously with Alonso running where he was, I think it justified them starting from the pit lane, especially when you're towards the back of the grid anyway. You've got less to lose. I'd like to see it more, to be honest. Cars that are towards the back of the grid, you know what? Yeah, just take them out apart firme and start from the pit lane. You're going to avoid any issues in turn one, any calamities that are going to happen anyway. So you kind of avoid that. Normally with cars fighting throughout the field, most cars will catch up to the back of the pack fairly quickly, and then they'll be in the same train that they would have been anyway. Yeah. So I don't see that there's a massive penalty starting from the pit lane, to be completely honest. And it'd be nice to see, you can use that opportunity of testing out something else, or trying to, like I said, if Alonso hadn't have had his sort of mechanical issue on that spec car, he probably would have finished in the points. So. Which from the pit lane I think is very impressive and justifies what they did with that car there. So no,
also,
fair play.
Just a bit of breaking news. It's been officially announced that there is no further action over Lance Stroll driving to the grid instead of going back into the pits. So he will keep hold of his points from this race. So that's a good weekend for Lance Stroll then. So I just had the thought that news might be out by now, and it was. So I just quickly checked it there whilst you were talking. So yeah. A bit of breaking news for anyone who's watching still at this point. But yeah, so moving on, we've not got much more to talk about, I swear. So Mercedes got caught between two strategies. We already talked about that briefly. Mm-hmm. Not the best weekend for their strategists. Hopefully they learn from this going forward. Leclerc, again, also similar to Daniel Ricciardo, showing that the one stop was not the best strategy. He just started dropping back at the end there. Some team orders for Alfa Romeo and Ferrari. How do we feel about these team orders in general, really?
Again, it's when points are on the line and you want to maximize your points. I think even if you, like, as we saw from decades ago, when you try and ban it, they'll find a way around it. they'll put him in there anyway. They'll just be a bit smarter about it and less obvious. So yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, I
you're
think both team orders
Yeah.
are justified. Sainz, I think,
Yeah,
may have
so.
overtaken someone else or got close to overtaking someone else off the back of it. And Bottas,
I think he was
was
chasing
able to
down Lando,
well.
wasn't he? So
Yeah, so I think both of them were justified with how their teammates performed once they got past them. So, but yeah, it's always a bit controversial team orders. Ever since the Michael Schumacher Barrichello incident, that's the one that really comes to mind. When it wasn't even necessary for Michael to win the championship, and they still made Rubens give it to him. But yeah, moving on from that anyway. Great late charge from Lewis. We've already discussed that. Fantastic way to end the race, though. Really, I haven't seen a race end like that in a long time, where you're like, oh, is he going to get him? Is he going to get him? Nice to see it from Lewis as well. You know, it's kind of been talked down about a lot recently, especially with him not having gotten a win in a certain amount of time. People have been a bit negative on him, so the fact that he's back up performing and he's the one that's doing all the chasing, it's really nice to see, and hopefully it's a sign of things to come from Mercedes. Max brakes issue. Do Red Bull needs to be worried? Do you reckon this is something that could affect them on a circuit like Mexico, where they've got big long straights? It's going to be heavy on the brakes.
I think, to be fair, like, their car's been bulletproof all year, so I think if this wasn't an issue that they've had on this particular set of brakes, and they've still managed to win the race, I think that's kind of, I think that's probably one of the worst things that's going to get thrown at them this year, which is a shame to say, in the hope of a different winner. But realistically, I wouldn't be too worried. I think, swap them out for some others that have worked perfectly fine throughout the rest of the season. I think they'll be fine. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I
I'm
fear
pretty
that
sure
might
brakes
just be
as well are a part that isn't really classified in Parc Ferme. So even if they got to
Yeah.
the beginning of a race and they wanted to change them, they could do so. Probably
absolutely.
won't affect them. But anything that might potentially worry Red Bull is a positive from me. So, track limits penalty for Alex Albon. Don't go over the line. I mean, they've made it bigger and we're still going over the line. Just don't go over the line. Simple as it. Please stop going over the line. But yeah, I mean, I don't have anything.
It's the same for everyone.
Like,
So
simple as, just don't do it. Max again showing pressure on the radio, getting very angry with his engineer, talking to him in the braking zone. It got to the point where I was like, there's so much more of the track that he can be talking to him in. Why is he deliberately asking him in the braking zone to wind him up? Was kind of where I was getting towards the end of this race. And like, I know he's got quite a good relationship with his engineer, and so part of me was thinking, is this just like their way of banter?
maybe.
But he was definitely getting frustrated, and I think that showed that he was under pressure, which is lovely to see. We want to see Max slapping under pressure with how much dominance he's had.
Well, just not walking away with it as much as anything else. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like he has with the whole championship. But literally, he could have won on his own without a teammate both championships this year, which is ridiculous. I saw the constructors' title standings, and Red Bull have double the next team. Double. Like, it's absolute joke. But yeah, clever last lap from AlphaTauri we've already talked about, and then the biggest thing, which was the post race, Max Verstappen getting booed on the podium. What's your thoughts on this? My thoughts kind of are along the lines of, it's the US, they love Lewis, and he just came in second, and it was close, and there's already a lot of bad blood between Lewis fans and Max fans. And then, in addition to that, there's also a lot of Checo fans as well in America. So, do you think that's a big factor to it, or do you reckon they're just fed up with him winning and we're booing him because of that?
Without trying to sound too generalize the whole population as it is, I think there'll be somewhat part of it will be that Max has essentially made the championship a bit boring this year. That'll be a part of it. Obviously, you heard it from, not obviously in the US, because Lewis is very popular in the US, but from other tracks, you've heard a lot of booing for Lewis in the past when he was very, very dominant and winning season after season. Whether that was from Vettel fans at the time, I don't know, to be honest, or Rosberg fans as it was.
Equally, Vettel got booed as well, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone who has a period of domination does tend to eventually get booed.
Yeah, I think, so I think a part of it would be that. I think for me, one of the most sort of interesting parts of it is, like I said, it's very, very close to Mexico. I'd be very interested to hear what happens next weekend. If again Max is on the podium, I reckon he'll get that, and I think that kind of stems from Checo's been a very, we've discussed Checo a lot tonight, but I think he's been a very good teammate for Verstappen. If you look back to helping Max with his first title in 2021, especially even like down to what he did in that Abu Dhabi race.
So one would argue that he won Max the championship in 2021.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, because without, he cost Lewis nearly 12 seconds in fighting.
Lewis enough time that there was the pits
that Lewis couldn't
really
basically. Yeah, so when that safety car came out, because Checo brought Lewis back towards Max again. That's why Lewis couldn't pit under the safety car, because he wouldn't have had a tough time to get back out in front of Max. And then if the race had finished under the safety car, it would have just you would have been like, why did you pit out of the lead and give you track position when the race wasn't going to start again? Yeah. So where Max had a kind of free stop, and that's only because he'd stayed within Lewis's window, and that's only because of what Perez managed to do to slow him down. So, I mean, without trying to talk too long about something that happened 2 years ago, Checo did an amazing job for Max, and Max was very vocal at the time in saying thank you. I mean, you go 12 months later on than that, or just under 12 months, to Brazil, when, again, Max has already sealed that title, or very, very close to, and, it's Checo fighting for P2 in the championship again. And all Max had to do, finishing 6th and 7th, I think they were at the time, is to give Checo a couple of extra points, swap it round, because Checo needs those points more than Max did at the time. And he absolutely refused to do it. And then started to make some comments about, what he's done, or, potentially heading back to the Monaco scenario. So it just showed that Max isn't the most sort of amenable teammate, and quickly forgot everything that Checo did for him the year before. So I think that's part of the reason why there's probably a lot of bad blood from Checo fans. I'm not going to say Mexicans as a whole, but Checo fans specifically. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of it. And I don't like to see booing at races like that. I think these drivers put their lives on the line every time they get in those cars, and I think everyone should be congratulated for their achievements and things like that. So yeah, I don't like to see it, but I can see why potentially they would have done that. And like you say as well, big fans of Lewis, and Lewis and Max fans generally don't tend to share the same seating area normally as you would. So I
have also heard people joking online, obviously, about Helmut Marko and how he might need an armed protection when he goes to Mexico after everything he said.
Is he actually going to Mexico?
I honestly don't think know. If I was him, I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't.
But yeah, I mean, equally so. I don't feel Max is going to be welcome. Really, he's probably going to try and keep a low profile and just let Checo do all the press work. That's what he probably should do in his situation. Probably what he'd prefer to do anyway, to be frank. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the reception next weekend. Hopefully we get a Checo win and we don't have to worry about booing on the podium. But
I mean, that'd be very popular, so yeah.
Anyone but Max. Anyone. I cannot stress this enough. Anyone but Max. I will take a Logan Sargent win right now. I'll do that.
I think everyone would, to be fair. That'd be really interesting.
Nice to see, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be nice to see.
Yeah. Or just someone really random from the back of the grid. Any of them.
I just said Logan Sargent. What do you want?
Hulkenberg, for example. Finally getting his podium.
Not actually. I really thought last year in Brazil we had a chance of that.
I know.
But Yeah, right. There's one more thing I want to talk about before we call it here, and that is seeing the F1 Academy with Formula One this weekend. It was nice to see it. If I'm correct, this is the first time I've seen it advertised or like shown on TV and stuff alongside the Formula One.
Yeah.
Which is surprising to me. There's a big thing about the F1 Academy, and then they've just done nothing about it and not really talked about it all that much until this weekend, and then suddenly it's like, oh, here we go, F1 Academy, this, that, and the next thing. I kind of feel like it's had very limited exposure in comparison to the W Series. Like it's basically killed the W Series. Let's not forget that.
It's an evolution of, I think, to be fair. It's yeah. So this is the first weekend where F1 Academy has shared the weekend at a track with F1. So that's probably the reason why it's the first time. It's probably been that
it's
obvious.
The last race of the season. That's what I mean. Like
of their season, yeah.
The last
exactly.
race of the F1 Academy. Let's keep in mind the F1 Academy, and it's had one race with the F1 calendar.
Yeah.
What's that about? Like W Series, you'd hear about it all the time. You'd be like see it on social media, things like that. Mm-hmm. Like it was posted everywhere. You heard about it. I haven't heard about F1 Academy pretty much all year since it started. Like I heard the announcement of the drivers. That was about it until this weekend, and then it's over. And it's like, why has this not been this should be alongside the normal Formula One race weekends, like along with Formula 2.
Yeah, so when W Series finished, my wife took particular pride in watching the W Series, and when she heard about F1 Academy, she probably made a bit more effort to particularly follow the F1 Academy. So we have been watching it throughout the year. It hasn't always been on. It hasn't been on race weekends. Essentially, this is the first one. But this is their very, very first season of it, and I think there was an element of they just didn't have necessarily a backing for essentially a new series at the start of the year to the same extent that maybe W Series had, or especially obviously the other feeder series. But from next year, there are 7 rounds, and they are all on F1 weekends, all of them. So next year,
I know some of the drivers are all going to have affiliations because like McLaren were announcing.
Yeah. So every team has signed up to put one of the F1 Academy cars in their liveries, which is interesting. Lena Buller is already running the Alfa Romeo livery this year, so you'll see 10 cars with actual F1 team liveries and backed by F1. The first one being announced is Bianca Bustamante from Thailand, I believe she is. And she's being supported by McLaren for next year and as part of their development program now, which is great. I think that's fantastic. And it shows that this series has actually, like you say, hasn't had as much exposure as it could have had or should have had, but they're definitely making moves in the right direction, and that's a great start and proving that it's working. And I think a lot of credit has to go to Susie Wolff for that. I think she's done a fantastic job in running that series and getting it to where it's going to be. Not necessarily where it is now, but where it's gonna be next year. I think it'll be a much bigger thing because at the minute you have some races with F2 as the support series, sometimes with F3, and then some sort of major weekends like I think it's Monza and Silverstone, you have F2 and F3. So next year, those races where neither of those series are there, I think the idea is F1 Academy will be on all the races there isn't any F2 or 3. So there'll always be something else to keep you interested throughout the weekend that isn't F1 on an F1 weekend, which I think is great.
I mean, I think it's good. It definitely sounds much better than this year where it's not been linked up with it. I do think F1 still needs to do more for getting young drivers, especially female young drivers, through. What do they win if they win F1 Academy? Like, is it just a prize fund, or like? This is just my opinion, right?
Yeah.
I feel like Formula One themselves should run a team in F2 where it is a guaranteed seat for one of them from the F1 Academy winner and one from an F3 winner, or next highest up that doesn't have a sponsorship can go into that team, so they are guaranteed a spot in Formula 2. That would, for me, would show that Formula One are serious about this, and that they really want to encourage the progression of these drivers instead of with the W Series where Jamie Chadwick ended up winning it 3 years in a row because there was nowhere for her to progress to. Like, You know, that they need to
Yeah.
do something to actually show that there's a point to this. Like, it's not just we've put women in cars and we're not going to let them go any further. Why? Why are you not helping them to progress? Like,
okay, so
get
it's
them to Formula 2.
So it's a big part of it is like a development series. So one of the rules is that Marta Garcia has done brilliant this year, and she's actually won the title. But she's as the title winner, she is not allowed to enter next year.
That's what she do now. So now they've effectively gone, right, you've won this, fantastic, goodbye, off you go, good luck in life.
Well, that's the thing. I think the point is that the series is supposed to be an exposure exercise, and the point, I think the argument now is that she should get picked up by one of the F2 or F3 series teams and go into that, be a sort of a natural progression. Obviously we saw Jamie Chadwick winning it 3 times in a row and dominating the W series 3 times in a row, and is now in Indy Light series, the NXT Indy series, so kind of junior Indy IndyCar.
Andretti for a second season, I believe in that.
Yeah, I believe it has, which is great. But it's still not.
But
that's not even.
So to get us to, she's won W Series 3 times, but to get a seat, she had to go to America. She couldn't go to Formula 2.
And still didn't end up in full IndyCar. Yeah. She's only in the junior series. So
that's the point. Formula 1 just isn't doing enough to support these young drivers, and I get it. It's a progression. Like it's definitely a step forward, but it's not a step enough. Like I understand there is could be a slight issue with Formula 1 itself running a team in a competitive league that it kind of runs. I get that, but then put something in place like the team that finishes bottom has to have this, or like
that's the thing. It's like
a way to get these drivers through that might not have the sponsorship. And things like that. Like Formula 1 can pick up that sponsorship and pay for that year. Like.
I mean, that would be a better idea. I think that would be a better point in the sense of maybe the F1 becomes part of part of the thing is if you win that series, that is here's the money from winning that series to buy your drive essentially in F2 or F3. It's very different.
Because like Jamie Chadwick, every year she won like £1 million.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
They need to do something. Extra.
Yeah, you won't get F1 running a team. They're not going to buy mechanics and
way of them doing something to make sure these drivers aren't just forgotten about as soon as they pass.
And how do you go to a team owner and say you have to have one of these drivers, and then that team owner is saying, well, why do I have to have it? Why don't one of them others? I don't think she's up to the scratch of these other drivers I want to put in my car. Why do I have to put them in that car? Why can't they one of the other teams? So it's a very, very difficult thing to say, which is why I think there'll need to be some sort of like financial benefit for the team of taking one of these drivers. So
or the other alternative, and I'm just putting this out there, is F1 Academy itself runs an F2 team. F1 Academy has an F2 team, so the driver that wins F2 goes into that seat, and the one who's like not performed or just bottom of F like in that seat drops out, and it's just like you'd be constantly putting new talent into it, and you're encouraging them to stay in it. It's a way of making sure Formula 1 itself isn't running it, but that there is a form of progression that's kind of almost guaranteed for these women. Because at the moment it's all good and well saying we're doing all this stuff for women, but they're still not getting the chance, and we're never going to end up with another female driver in Formula 1 if they're not given the chance to show that they can actually do Formula 2.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Sophia Flörsch in F3. And there's some races where she did really, really well. So that's a positive start. And I think it'll be people like that going through the series that will encourage more women to think that, oh, actually, I could do that, and start from the early rages. I think that's where you need to look at grassroots that they're doing football, and that's why sort of women's football's really taken off recently, because they spent a lot of time and effort building it up from the bottom and encouraging women's leagues and women's teams right from an early age. And I think they need to do the same with karting and sort of stuff like that. I think you need to think earlier and actually bring the talent that's nurtured earlier, so they're not so far behind the guys going through, so that they're not missing out on those first 5, 6, 7 years of development, and that's why they're so far behind. it's very difficult as well when you're in an all-women series to say, okay, well, Marta Garcia has done really well and Jamie Chadwick dominated W Series against all the other women that are in that series, but they might go into F2 or even F3 and be nowhere because maybe the development and the competitiveness just isn't there in that league. And that's where I think there's an element of they just don't know and necessarily want to take the risk. So I think, yeah, like I say, I do see what you're saying. There needs to be something in place to try and help encourage them to go up through the formulas. But I think it's something that needs to start earlier. And I find it doesn't sit well with me to manufacture places on that grid. I still think that the F2 and even F3 grid should be there on merit. I don't even like paid drivers, as I'm sure you're aware as well. People just buying their seats. It goes back to it's a rich man sport. I think it should be the very best talent goes in those seats. Now, if at the minute the problem is why there's not more women than just Sophia Flörsch is because they've looked at the talent pool of all the drivers in the world that want to do single-seater like that, and the top 40 drivers covering F1 and 2 and F3, only one of them that's in the top 40 drivers in the world that are developing up, only one of them's a woman, because only one woman is good enough to be in that top 40 because there's 39 other men better. That is part of the inherent issue of why they need to start earlier in the grassroots and get women into karting, into everything sooner, so they're having that development at the same rate as the men, and then when they get to that point where they are driving the bigger cars, F3 and upwards, they've had the same amount of time developing. It's as simple as that, and it's not going to happen overnight, but that's the best I can offer at the moment.
Yeah, fair. Well, let us know in the comments what you think in regards to the F1 Academy and how you would like to see women's progression in motorsport going forward, and just your opinions in general. We'd love to hear your opinions on everything we've talked about tonight. But yeah, that's everything for us. It is actually 1 o'clock in the morning. I joked that we would still be here, and we are still here because we love chatting about Formula One. And to be honest with you, we haven't gone through every single point that I had on my list of things to talk about. We'd probably be here until 2-3 in the morning if we did. So we are going to stop now. We do still have day jobs, but thank you if you have taken time to watch this all the way through, either live or later on. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about them, and maybe we can discuss them in a later video at some point. But for now, the league that we actually race in is on Thursday nights at 7:30 normally on Twitch. You can find mine and Bowser's Twitch links in the description below. Please feel free to come watch us. Wibsy will normally be with us as well. Check out his channel on Twitch also. Give him a watch. He's always great to watch, and yeah, he's a great lad, and we'll get him on for a future video. Absolutely 100% if he's not shopping. But yeah, for now, thank you very much.